going on today, guys? Welcome back to the channel and today's video. We are finally, as promised, getting into some fabrication videos with the FRS. So today we are going to be building the new single exit exhaust I've come up with. So it should be really fun. We are going to be going to OSW in just a little bit. So let's get to it, start breaking this thing down, and I will show you kind of the first step or the first thing we need to make to kind of attach the exhaust, which is somewhere up there, to its home here. In general, when you start messing with turbo stuff, you start messing with headers, you start messing with different over pipes, different front pipes, you will get kind of an inconsistency in where your exhaust lands. There's just a lot of differences in flanges and things like that. Some people use thicker flanges, some people use close to OEM flanges. In general, they try to keep the same dimensions, but it's always going to be off, so by a little bit. So up here you can see where I'm off by just a little bit, and this is going to be the first thing we address before we even get into finishing the rest of the piping, is making sure that we have a solid hanger here. And I'm just going to make it one bolt, just make it a simple little hanger deal, and try to correct some of the variances we've gotten from using all these different pipes. Let me just show you what these are. These are the cup and bung sets from Rad Dan. Rad Dan, if you don't know, is a FD pro, or he used to run FD, and he makes these really cool cup and bungs, which you can see this one's aluminum. He sells them in aluminum and steel. That way you can make a quick attachment piece, something like this. And he goes ahead and threads them in M8 or M6, and same thing for the cups. It's drilled out for either M6 or M8. So yeah, this is pretty close. Obviously not perfect, but it doesn't really need to be exactly perfect. So it's looking pretty good to me. That shouldn't be too bad to tack up. All right, time to clean up my mess a little bit and head to OSW. Yeah, buddy! Yes! Alright, good morning, guys. It is the next day. I've got the ground clamp for the TIG welder jimmied up here just barely. That's the tack we need to do, is essentially right there. So I'm pretty much all ready to jam out. I was just going to show you guys real quick, basic, how I kind of do tacks, I guess you could say, in hard to reach areas like this. So what I've done is gone ahead and set up the torch on a finger trigger. So I'll be able to go in there just with this torch and just hit the spot where I need to, and that's it. You just kind of set your amps to what you want. It's no modulation, it's an on-off switch essentially, and that is what 2T is. I'm not going to get into too many details, but I will put up a video that goes over all the differences between 2T, 4T, and then foot pedal. So as we go through the process of building out this exhaust, I really want to relay some tips that definitely could have helped me out in the beginning of welding, but I think in some cases I was just being a little too stubborn or whatnot. So one big thing when you're going to be learning how to TIG weld initially is dealing with heat, learning how to control heat, and hopefully making sure you're not putting too much heat into your workpieces. Now you might have heard the welder is making a kind of weird sound here. And what that is the pulse function. The pulse function I wish I would have started on literally day one. I'm not going to say it's a complete lifesaver. It's not going to save your ass in every situation. But what it does do is kind of keep the heat down, keep the heat a little more controlled. So I am definitely not saying here that this is some magic band-aid that is going to magically teach you how heat management works and not blowing out pieces, not ruining metal. You're going to do that for sure. But most definitely try out the functions that your welder has, because more often than not, there's an application for it. Like in this case, we are welding a very tiny piece. I want to hopefully minimize warpage as much as possible, although as you can see with this kind of setup, it's definitely going to warp to some degree. But with pulse, it keeps it at kind of like the minimum required heat in order to weld in a way. So it's just enough heat to weld, not much more, and it's literally pulsing the metal, so it's not a constant beam that inherently creates a little more heat than this process. So at this point here, I am not only burning myself, one, but two, I am realizing I did indeed warp the living crap out of this. So another tip here is you can literally never have too many tools to clamp things, as you can see by this monstrosity here. So we got it in the vise along with this gigantic table clamp that I got from Harbor Freight, I believe, and did my best to let it cool in this contraption so that it hopefully would stretch it back to the dimensions that I needed. But it wasn't all too bad because it ended up fitting just fine and pulling the exhaust in the direction that I pretty much wanted it to go. The next step here was just simple mock-up. I've only done the very easy sections of this exhaust so far. So you can see here, just a straight section and the first 45 that I knew ahead of time needed to happen. So I brought down with me a Milwaukee marker, which is so sweet, you gotta get one, works so good on metal. And one of the 45s marked up the angle on both pipes, essentially just draw a line so I know where it should line up, and then brought it back to the bench to get some tacking done. Now, as you can see, I got these little blocks going on, or these little V blocks going on that you might have seen even in some of the prior scenes. And these would be a really good project to do as your first project. Essentially, all they are just angle steel cut in little 3-inch sections, and you weld them together. So it makes a nice little resting place for joining pipes together. It helped me out a ton, and definitely a lifesaver compared to trying to do this on like just a normal flat table. So tacking a piece of pipe together seems simple on a surface level. However, I promise you, if you have never done it before, you are definitely going to struggle your first few times. But there's one thing that will definitely help you, and that is going in hot and going in fast. Now, you do not necessarily need filler for your very first tack on stainless steel. You can most definitely fuse them together without any filler whatsoever. But in order to do that, you really need really good fit up, 1, and 2, you need to be in there hot, fast, and out there very quickly. So it takes a few times kind of cracking that throttle to figure out exactly the right technique, but you'll definitely get the hang of it. Set your amps for at least 100 amps, even if it is super thin stuff. This is 16 gauge stainless steel. It's not the thinnest stuff out there, but it's also definitely not thick by any means. 100 amps is way too much if you were to be, welding this entirely, but we are only hitting 100 amps, maybe even less than that, for literally a split second, and then we're off it. So try it out with that in mind if you're doing steel, and just remember that this does not apply to aluminum whatsoever. It's a very different story on that other side of the boat. One thing you're gonna notice as I'm going through this is the order of operations is somewhat redundant, and it almost needs to be if you're gonna be doing a tight fitting exhaust. As you can see, the area here is very close to a lot of different items. There's the fuel tank, there's the differential, and then it also has to clear the subframe. So in order to make sure that we're getting the correct fit and things are not changing too drastically as we go along, I'm essentially tacking a few pieces, welding them all the way through, and then continuing from there. You really don't want to just tack the whole exhaust up from beginning to end and then hope for the best that it's not going to warp. It most likely will shift here and there, different directions, as you weld out the exhaust section by section. So you're going to notice here, once again, we're using a pulse function. This pulse function, or these settings in particular, I got from Rush Kane, or Kane Kid. He's known by a few different names, but he's a pretty famous welder, very talented welder. And these are the settings that he uses when he does autogenous welding. Autogenous welding is when you don't use filler. As you've seen, I've very rarely used filler here and there just to help with some gaps. But for the most part, I'm trying to weld this thing completely fusion style. That way, I'm not adding any weight, and also this exhaust, or this end of the exhaust, does not need to be as strong as, say, a header pipe. There's not a lot of stress on this pipe. It's simply just evacuating the exhaust gas to the back of the car. That's it. You will also notice that I'm not back purging. That's a whole different subject. There's a million subjects in welding. I can only cover so many. But for me, I just felt that back purging this exhaust was going to be kind of an extreme amount of argon and maybe an extreme amount of detail I don't necessarily need for my first go about it. So that's going to conclude my spiel, or my tips and tricks of welding for the time being. In future videos, we're definitely going to incorporate welding more and more into it. I really enjoy it, and thanks to people like Rush Kane and other welders on YouTube, it's really helped me kind of move forward into having my own fun, making my own stuff, and being the hot rodder from Monster Garage I always wanted to be growing up, right? I think a lot of people have that kind of Jesse James-ish dream of they want to be able to just make things with their bare hands, and I think this is such a cool hobby and has been very refreshing to do exactly that and kind of make my own little mini Monster Garage in here and make cool hot rod stuff for my little hot rod. So that's going to be it from me. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the montage. If you have any questions whatsoever, any comments whatsoever, drop it below, and let's try to keep things constructive and try to keep things, informative for somebody who would be reading it, who would be fairly new to it. I'm definitely no expert. I've probably said some things that piss welders off. That's okay. Correct me, do it in the comments, and let's all hopefully become a little bit better welders together. All right, guys, enjoy. See you on the next one.
my God.